Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shub, and together with my partner and co host Patric, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Hey Patrick, seems like we're mixing things up big time on this show. We actually have started, this episode with something other than just the two of us, and we actually have like a screen share already going.
That's right, but that's because I forgot to switch it off. But yeah, we're going to do something more like the Twitch streamers would do, the kids would do.
Yeah.
We released our new website this week with some big news from the portfolio this week and some other related news. And with that also we have updated the letter that we wrote to the community 5 years ago. So we've released the version 2 for the next 5 years of what we stand for, what we believe in, what our mission is, blah, blah. And we're going to use today to talk about that because there's a few juicy parts in there.
Absolutely. So I think this episode will be a bit different. We'll obviously look inwards and not so much provide commentary on what we're seeing elsewhere. But we'll also, as you mentioned, do the Twitch or the YouTube streamer sort of a format here. Let's see how this works for us.
Yeah. I mean, it's a nice, I think today's episode is going to be a nice view inside the Foundamental kitchen, like how the sausage is being made, why we like certain things,
Yeah.
a lot of like the root causes and the whys behind other things that people perhaps notice about us.
Absolutely. So shall we dig into it?
Let's do it. So the way we're going to do it is basically we're scrolling through the letter today and basically explain what we mean and perhaps give examples where appropriate. So let's skip the origins because that's like more looking into the past, but the patterns piece, right? And so I can kick us off here, Shub. So with what we've noticed generally about investing is that there's a combination of macro factors that influence shaping a market or a sector, like the sectors that we cover, AECS, architecture, engineering, construction, supply chain. So the macro shapes it, but then also something from the bottom up happens. And so let me perhaps kick us off from the macro side, right? So what we mean by macro is that venture capitalists have poured a ton of capital over the past 20 years into a lot of different sectors. And usually these sectors were very close to consumers or very close to enterprise software, generic IT, etc. But by pouring capital and allocating capital, they shaped the sector, right? And so it's this macro capital allocation that really shapes it. And at the same time, they haven't done the same thing for construction, right? So that's part of the pattern that we're seeing is that we actually think this capital allocation is now happening. And that was part of our founding thesis, if you see it here, is that past 5 billion of capital allocation into a sector, an inflection happens, meaning the capital attracts more capital. And so over the past 5 years, the amount of capital that went into our sectors has actually 6x'd compared to the previous 30 years, right? And so that's that's mathematically the definition of an inflection against the down market, because the last 2 years were really not easy for most of the venture sectors. So our point here in the letter is that macro capital allocation shapes entire sectors and it attracts more capital, and that's what's happening.
Yeah. One thing that we touched upon a bit in our most recent episode, and both you and I have separately covered in articles that we've written, when we started Foundamental, incredibly, construction tech only had received in aggregate until then about 0.1% of the VC funding, which if you think about it is absolutely nuts, considering that construction, broadly speaking, covers about 10% of the economy. So even on a prorated basis or on a parity basis, is only getting 100th of the funding that it should be, or it was getting only 100th of the funding. And the crazy thing is, Patrick, in spite of all the things that we just spoke about, I think we've done the math. The number has only gone from about 0.1% to 0.3%.
Yeah,
Right?
0.45 recently in the last
Okay.
quarter, but right before 0.3.
Yeah. So that's how much the extent of disparity is. So just to give you a sense, if it just goes from zero point 0.1 to 0.45 to 1 now, right? And even though it is off by literally an order of magnitude of
Yeah.
what parity would represent, that is a easy 2x, right? As some people would call it in quick time in terms of like a correction to normality. And I think we are kind of seeing the momentum pick up in this correction to parity in the activity that construction tech sees.
And one thing that I've noticed about some of the venture investors that I admire the most is they I wouldn't say they are macro capital allocators. That would be not the right statement, but they do consider the macro environment and how it shapes a certain sector. So falling in love with an asset, a technology, a founder, etc., it's just not enough. You have to be also right about the sector. We come about like where to play later in the ladder, but that's
Yeah,
exactly what that means. You're picking the sector as much as the asset.
absolutely. Yeah.
So that's the macro part. The micro part, which is the other side that is in our conviction shaping a sector, is that as you allocate more and more capital to a sector, now we stand at about 30 billion cumulative VC into our sectors, which is the aforementioned 6x. Here is the 0.3% that you were mentioning. As more capital gets allocated, something else happens. The grassroots get built. It's like throwing out the seeds on the soil and then pouring water on it and seeing what happens. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what is happening, right, Shub?
Absolutely. I think when we started, I think at best we were perhaps somewhere in wave one, I want to say. I think we're starting to see both some wave two and maybe early signs of wave three companies as well. By the way, when I say wave three companies, referencing what we have over here, that doesn't mean it's end game or they've consolidated everything.
Yeah.
It's very early signs of, for example, if we were to rewind to 2002, 2003, there were early signs that the likes of Amazon, Google, etc., would become very dominant companies and have the ability with lots of optionality to get into other business lines. I think we're starting to see a small but very promising cohort of companies emerge in construction tech with those kinds of capabilities. And
And
the incredible thing, I think that will actually help foster, going back to what you said with grassroots, seed the ecosystem. There's a very useful churn and invigoration happening in the sense the ecosystem is building on itself now.
And so you're perfectly setting me up, right? Because the macro, the grassroots that happen when you allocate capital for a long enough amount of time and with a little bit of inflection, there are three types of grassroots that we consider. We haven't written about that in the letter, but just you can think about it that way. So there's founders flocking into the space. There is companies learning how to adopt technology. And then the third one is there's data pools getting formed that all
Yeah.
of a sudden become connected. That's what our waves theory is about, right? And so we've spoken about it for many years, actually. The more capital got allocated into architecture, engineering, construction, supply chains, and founders tasting success, that's what you've been evangelizing about for many, many years, the better the founders are that come into the sector because they have tasted success and because they attract others who
Yes.
have tasted success. The companies get now used to actually working with very high quality solutions and working with very high quality people all of a sudden, which in itself also fuels the flywheel further, keep going, adopting, right? And then the third piece is by adopting and by having great founders that build, you actually build up more and more and more data. And that is a very important point in our letter, which I think can get lost in today's day and age of AI craze. So in architecture, engineering, construction, and supply chains, the AI can only unfold its full potential when the sector from the grassroots up has actually connected the various data pools that got built over the last 10 to 20 years. Until we have that data infrastructure and that data connectivity, AI will not be able to unfold its entire full potential the way we see it today in consumer. Why? Well, in consumer, the LLMs were able to literally scrape the internet and had connected data that way. But in construction and the surrounding and adjacent markets, that needs to be built first. So data infrastructure is a very, very interesting play, even prior to AI unfolding its full value. That's our conviction.
Absolutely. I think we have mentioned, I believe, a few times in previous Practical Nerds episodes that we still are somewhere in the analogy of the Internet 1.0 era.
Yeah.
So you can't build or train AI models when the basic rails for conducting transactions in an improved, digitized manner have not yet been fully built. So I think that's what we're seeing now. But I'm very excited about. I think in our recent video with our friends over at Bricks and Bytes, I think I'd even made a comment. Imagine it's 90. You know what you know today, and you've been teleported or transported back in time to the year 1995 or 1996, and you've been told, hey, you get to be an internet entrepreneur. That's the sort of feeling I have with what construction tech represents.
Very, very exciting times, if you know that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we at least feel we do. So, you made one other, I think, very important remark. I just want to double underline. So the waves, what we've been talking about for the last 5 minutes, we call it the waves thesis in Foundamental, right? And so that doesn't mean that it ends. It's actually never ending. It will keep going and keep compounding. The more you build, the more and bigger and bolder things will get built. The more macro capital you allocate, it's the same effect, right? And so just to give you an idea, something over here. I mean, we have the 30 billion capital allocation cumulatively of VC into construction. I mean, that's nothing compared to where we need to be, right? So fintech to date is 500 billion. And that's a sector, that is not larger than the construction sector from a GDP perspective. Mobility tech, 300 billion. Logistics tech, 300 billion. I mean, and again, there's more capital getting allocated to these sectors. There is no end to it, literally, right? So we're only really in the infant stages of the transformation of our sector, both from macro capital allocation as well as from grassroots up connectivity of data, founders, customer adoption, etc. So it's a very exciting time for founders and investors to keep building the next 100 legendary tech companies, because we think they will get built in our sectors.
But it seems like not everyone knows how to look at these kinds of opportunities, Patrick, right?
What a great segue. So let's talk about the fallacies part of our letter, right? So we shared here in the patterns what gives us so much excitement about our sector and how to think about it. But then at the same time, it's a sector that is having a lot of nuance, while the generic investor model, investors that look at 50 different sectors every year or 100 or whatever, no? If you're a generic investor, it's very tough to work on these nuances. It's very easy, though, to invest in companies that look and smell like everything that you know of, that you already have empathy for. And the truth is, and it can get lost in the Twitter VC bro bubble, the backgrounds of generic VC investors almost exclusively, do your own research, is they're consumers and they are former software managers or former IT managers. So who do you expect them to have empathy for? Mm-hmm. Certainly not the CNC machinist or the construction manager or the supply chain manager or the procurement manager. Mm-hmm. How could they? It's not their background. You can't blame them. So every investor, whatever they have empathy for, they know the nuances, and where they know the nuances, they will actually have an advantage of identifying category creating firms early. But because construction has so many nuances, that empathy doesn't necessarily translate, does it, Shub?
It doesn't. I mean, to be fair, I think backgrounds plays a role into it. But I feel like background is a relatively small part of the reason. I think a larger part of the reason, and I think we have also discussed this previously, is when you have, say, 25 different sectors that you could chase, and you have other motives governing you, like AUM maximization, for example, right? Or you need to make sure you're in the hottest company of the season, it's our hottest theme of the season, etc. There's other, let's call them temporary priorities or temporary objectives you're serving, which are not always, unfortunately, which are not always about return maximization and things of that sort. Which is why I think you can be more of a chasing mindset rather than thesis building or being centered in what you need to focus on, that sort of mindset. And I think the interesting thing is, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, uh, too many VCs will form very, very simple heuristics and simple and incorrect heuristics around what construction and or construction tech entails, and that sort of is used in a very sort of sweeping paintbrush motion to paint all construction companies.
Oh my God! Let me
Yeah.
use let me use my favorite example because it happened just so often over the first 5 years of Fundamental. One of these herd heuristics is very stupidly, enterprise software is great,
Yeah.
and enterprise software should be distributed with these motions, and it should be priced in this type of model, usually in some kind of recurring pricing, etc. And as part of that mantra and that herd heuristic, the same investors for 5 years have told me how dumb it is and how venture unbackable it is to back companies that start with services. Shub, honestly, I can't tell you how often I have heard this. And in construction, I mean, we have been saying this for a long time. Outcome as a service is a fantastic way
Yeah.
to build a company, to get transactions quickly, to build frequency and discovery quickly, to actually be net profitable quickly. Why? Because construction is a market that is very used to buying services, buying transactions, buying outcomes. It's a track record industry where track record compounds, and for that I need to guarantee an outcome. I can't always sell a tooling. Also, on top of that, we spoke about that in another episode recently, I'm attacking 20 to 50 times larger value pools if I
Yeah.
attack services
Yeah.
rather than just the software spent in the P&L of the industry, right? But that's been a mantra and a herd heuristic. Why? And that's important to the fallacies piece of our community letter. Well, because the brain of the human, the brain of the generic investor is I look for things that I have experience with and that look and smell like my past successes. But construction just has these different principles that
Yeah.
create different companies that look different in the first 5 years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to reference what you said earlier about software, this reminds me just, I think maybe 3 weeks ago, I was speaking with a marketplace over in Africa where, I mean, a very impressive founder who, for some reason, felt compelled to talk about what they're doing on software, how they might roll out subscriptions. And I think post the call, I actually had a candid chat with both the founder as well as the investor. And both admitted, hey, you know what? We'd be massively relieved if we wouldn't have to talk about selling it as software. But it's just,
Nice.
that's what we've been told, that's what VCs want to see. It's
Oh my
such a
God.
shame.
I mean, it's in that case, it's extremely important that founders remain headstrong and conviction strong. And then at some point, they find someone like you, someone that is a specialist in a vertical, that actually gives them, from a place of authority, experience, empathy for the sector, what I think is the right view, right? And so, but that's such a perfect example of I think, day to day of what's happening to founders. I have a similar example. There's a European founder that I admire, a second-time founder. They are building in, let's call it roughly supply chain management for construction sites. And I had chatted with him like many times, but one instance that stuck with me was when he had started his new company post the previous one. He was maybe a year into the journey, and he said, Patric, I have gotten so much shit advice from VCs about my new company that I've stopped talking to them. I said, why? He said, well, because they keep telling me that A, I should not be net profitable because, I need to be burning cash. I already shook my head. And B, he said, they all told me that they would never invest if I don't build a software business, because what he's building initially is a service business that is net profitable and that customers actually buy, right? Which leads to all sorts of benefits, optionality, discovery, frequency, etc. And I told him, I said, just don't listen to them. Luckily, this is a very mature-minded founder with enough experience under the belt and enough personality to just don't listen to them. And so I gave him my take. And then afterwards, he said, it was so refreshing and reassuring to hear it. And since then, he actually has said, I'm not going to raise VC. I hope he changes his mind, perhaps with me at some point. But I think he's going to be headstrong to not do that. But this is an exception of a founder, right? So most founders that will build in our space, perhaps some of them are younger, perhaps some of them come from different backgrounds, and there's a lot to unlearn. Also from the founder perspective of these mantras that our investor communities keep teaching them wrongly.
Look, I mean, for me, we have the four C's in the categories of fallacies. And I think the ones on company, contribution, and collaboration, I think that could be said in general for maybe 90% of the VCs, I feel like operating, unfortunately, whether they're sector agnostic or not, etc., to be very honest with you, and honest with our viewers, the unique thing, and I think you, me, and Adam, and the rest of our team, we've been in this unique situation where when it comes to the fallacies on category, I think we've had the unique perspective of seeing a really fascinating, sometimes very funny, sometimes utterly random explanations which fall into these category-based fallacies of how they look at these companies.
I'll give you one, but you go first. Talk to me about like the gross margin talking point from the VC parrots that you had the last 2 years.
I'm trying to remember if we had spoken about this in a recent episode, but just to give you an idea, I think we have. So, and the reason why this example would come more from India than elsewhere is that's where we have seen most action in terms of B2B managed marketplaces. So a few years ago, the narrative was, hey, just grow. Any working capital you carry on the balance sheet is bad, regardless of how good the margin looks, right? Right? Regardless of how good the margin looks, regardless of what the return on capital employed looks like, etc., etc. And show like a pure asset light business, right? Which, by the way, there's so many interpretations of that. Again, quick side note. One mental note I made when you said construction tech has got a 30 billion in funding. I think something like Uber alone has absorbed about 10 billion in funding. Just put that into perspective, right? For an asset-light business. But anyway, that side note aside.
Very smart side note.
Yes. So that was a few years ago. Now the narrative has flipped to such an absurd degree where regardless of what the return on capital employed might be, whether the business has no working capital or negative working capital or high working capital, the demand is for high contribution margins, and it doesn't matter how they achieve it. So there's, for example, I've come across businesses who are not just carrying working capital. They're literally stocking physical inventory in their own warehouse over like 90 days in order to squeeze out those double-digit margins, just because that's now the new narrative, right? I think that is as traditional as it gets. That is definitely not even, I mean, it may work, but then that is a model which you can only do so much with technology. If you have resorted now to stocking inventory, keeping your own goods and so on.
Yeah.
And a lot of the same people who had a problem now suddenly are supporting these models. And the bizarre thing is, in neither of these things is anyone talking about, hey, what is actually the return you're getting on any money you're deploying or employing in the business.
Yeah.
Which I find quite fascinating, how we randomly swing between these two extremes.
That's unbelievable. I mean, usually my position in life on most mistakes and accountability is that most errors in life, it takes two to dance. And I would really love to blame also the founder community for accepting stupid heuristics and fallacies by VCs, but I cannot. The founders bear no responsibility in this specific instance. The reason is that the generic VC community just is too much of an echo chamber. And you can't blame a person standing inside an echo chamber and blaming them for hearing the echo. Right? It's just you can't blame them. And unfortunately, that's exactly the case with these herd heuristics and fallacies. It's like there's a lot of echo. It takes someone to pull you out of the echo chamber and hear a different tune to actually realize that what you're hearing is not very good. So I just wish that founders hear this and they say, no, I don't have to buy the echo chamber just because it gets repeated and repeated and repeated. And honestly, the VC feeds in social, they are like echo chambers. They really are.
I mean, look, sorry to speak.
No, go on.
The very first narrative that we have in the category, the fallacy on category. Imagine, again, going back to what I said.
Which says, for the audio viewers, it says here that the fallacy that generic VCs will say is, we haven't seen such a model succeed before, so let's wait until it's proven.
Correct. So now going back to what I said previously, imagine it's the year 95 or 96 and you're building for the internet. How hey, it's a chicken and egg, dude. So how will you see a winning model, because you're not there yet, right? Yeah. So the fact that you're assuming that you can only copy winning models over here fundamentally means you have a very different understanding of what construction is. You have forgotten or never realized that construction is still in a completely different era in terms of innovation, which is of course what we are excited about, but then you cannot treat it as yet another vertical carrying on in the same sort of genre of innovation as every other sector.
You're setting me up perfectly for the next section of our letter. I'll skip the fallacy example that I had. Let's just move on. But you're making a very important point that segues us here. So the first one of what you're pointing out is that the point that we're making, the capital allocation into B2B markets is flawed. It's flawed because investors don't have the empathy, but they look for things that they have empathy and experience for. And that leads them to looking for clones, not creators. And in B2B, unfortunately, to find a creator, you need empathy, you need a lot of nuance, and you need to have the will to dig into the details. That's the first point. The second point of the investor reality, though, is what we call regularity. So Shub, you're setting us perfectly up here. So what we're right now debating, what the generic echo chamber and the generic herd heuristics of investors are leading to is just backing an army of category clones. And unfortunately, that is exactly what we're not supposed to do. As venture investors, and that's what you're not supposed to do as a founder either. You're supposed to actually build companies and partner with companies that have in their own right the potential to be an outlier. That's the only reason why you should partner with a VC. If you don't build that, you will still have the chance to build a very important company, but then don't accept VC. That's a waste of your equity. Don't do that. But to take VC or to invest VC, you need to be investing in what you think can be an outlier. But the mindset we just discussed is exactly not that.
Yes.
When people hear this now, for some of them this might be a revelation, but I dare you, go out, reflect, and just look at all the VCs that you've been talking to and all the mantras that you have been hearing and apply them to what you know about architecture, engineering, construction, and supply chains. And I dare you, I bet you, I reach you my hand for a bet, you will find exactly those herd heuristics that we're talking about, and you will find people looking for category clones, not category creators. Examples in case that happened in quick commerce. Yeah. It happened in quick commerce because the herd heuristics was, quick commerce companies, they can grow so fast and they can absorb so much cash to grow into empires. What was the point that the nuance was overlooked on? They had shit unit economics. It just didn't work, but the herd heuristic told you to back the fifth category clone of quick commerce. Scooters, years before, the same thing. Buy now, pay later only worked in a ZERP environment because the only thing it did better was a little bit more distribution. But ZERP environment changed, doesn't work anymore. Why did all these things happen? Because there's herd heuristics being applied to it. And the herd heuristics, and then I'll hand it back to you, Shub, the herd heuristics are not used on signals of substance. They are not used on, I'm talking about the B2B capital allocation now. The B2B capital allocation does not happen in these regularities, and it doesn't happen because someone looks at the substance of a business and says, hey, that's net profitable. The working capital makes sense in relation to the margins. They are growing the way I want them to. They seem to be highly differentiated. They seem to be a category creator. Let's go. That's exactly not what these people do. They look at Crunchbase and they look at their WhatsApp and they look at the total capital allocation in the last 18 months into a sector, and then they go, well, that seems to be like a sector I should be deploying capital in. Let's go into quick commerce company number 5. I'm not shitting you. That's what happens.
I mean, look, what I could say is a lot of what we point out in regularities, for our viewers and listeners, I can only recommend going back into the archives and checking out our episode on category creators, which I think we speak about both good examples as well as vent a bit on some of our observations. So many times, I feel like it's almost a prerequisite if you want to create or if you want to be a category creator or fund a category creator in the AECS, you pretty much have to forget what other VCs are looking for.
Yes.
Both as an investor as well as a founder, and read market signals, read what your clients are telling you, read what your business health seems to suggest on its own in terms of what it needs to improve its business health. And that will point you in a certain direction. And I feel like the category creators that we have backed within Foundamental, as well as those we have seen and admired from a distance, they all seem to have this quality almost without fail common to them.
I agree. So, which as a result means lots and lots of capital is inefficiently deployed into B2B in an army of category clones instead of category creators. Because the category creators, I mean, it's very, very lonely in the first years to actually build a category creator as a founder, because very likely, Shub, you've talked about this in another episode, very likely you're going to look exactly not like what the army of generic investors is looking for, right? So they look for the heuristics, they look for the repeatable successes, which by definition don't make sense, because if you're building something outlier, you are not a repetition of something. Yeah. You're truly something different. Yeah. So it can be very lonely as a founder, and it can be much more status advancing to just go out there and say, hey, you know what? I know they're going to put 5 billion into quick commerce. Let me build quick commerce clone number 12 and get some capital. Most likely, though, it's not going to lead you to a very promising outcome.
I mean, I would still encourage everyone to go and check out our episode on category creators. But as a TLDR, what it basically means is if you are a category creator, in general, you'll find it tougher to explain in like 1 or 2 sentences what the business is and why it needs to exist.
Yeah.
You find that investors find it harder to understand why you're a special company.
Yes.
They ask way more questions. They diligence you more. Your fundraising process in general takes a whole lot longer, and perhaps very suboptimally, perhaps you have to scrounge a bit to make things happen. But in general, you seem to get love from your users or customers, and they seem to be fine. I think these kinds of recipes are generally a good mix. And in fact, I would say all are needed to define you as a category creator. In other words, if everyone starts loving you from day one as a business, you're probably not a category creator.
I would agree.
Lucky. Yeah, you're just lucky.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, are you saying that I should not be building the Uber for parking places?
By the way, I think such a business exists, and there are businesses like that, and they've raised quite a bit of money as well. Hey, I mean, maybe you should, and maybe you could get lucky.
Yeah, I don't like to rely on luck. Yeah, so we're really here to change that with the founders, and we're also here to give founders the playbook and the belief in themselves that not only should they not get discouraged, if the B2B capital allocation into what they are doing is inefficient, quite the opposite. You should be excited about it because it doesn't mean, okay, so let's also say something clearly. Just because you don't get capital doesn't make you a category creator, right? So if you don't get capital, there can be 100 other reasons why you don't get capital, right? But if you very easily get capital, that also doesn't mean you're building something exciting. It can just be a symptom of very inefficient B2B capital allocation for all the reasons we've talked about for the last half hour.
Absolutely.
So we're halfway through our letter, Shub. We're now more looking into, so this is what we've analyzed. This is the anatomy of what we think everything is going wrong with regard to capital allocation into our sectors. Let's talk about how we want to approach it and what we want to do. So perhaps you can walk me through, like, we have a lot of convictions here and things that we unlearned over the last 5 years, new arrows that we added to our quiver, but we're highlighting 4 here in the letter that really define us, like in our core. So perhaps you want to walk me through these 4.
Sure. So for the benefit of, by the way, again, before I go here, I must stress that this episode in particular is better enjoyed with the video experience. So if you can, please do that. So now back to our regular broadcast.
Public service announcement.
Yeah, I wanted a bit of a public service announcement right there. So what we have here is a 2x2 matrix. So think of it like the top left quadrant. What we have is chasing vertical singularities. That's the what of what we do. The bottom left quadrant is distilling and directing truths. The bottom right quadrant is embracing discomfort. And the upper right quadrant is earning nuanced knowledge. Quite a mouthful, Patrick.
So let's perhaps start with the vertical singularities, because we're making that really a core of our letter and also a real call to action to the founder community that we interact with and want to interact with is, guys, chase vertical singularities. A singularity, if you're a math freak, you will know what it is. If not, also fine. But essentially, in mathematical definition, it's like a freakish occurrence in nature. It's the thing that is actually, by definition, unrepeatable. And so that goes so counter to everything we've discussed, right? But it's the unrepeatability, if it's just big enough, if the amplitude is large enough of such a singularity in the market you're working on, that's how you can actually build a category creating company and an outlier business. It's very unlikely that you will build such a thing in B2B, and especially in our sectors, if you're not attacking something that is extremely odd and specific to construction, right? And so that's exactly what we're looking for, is these vertical singularities specific to our sectors, because they unlock that category creation potential. And so, people will probably now go, what is he talking about? What could be a vertical singularity? Deliberately, we're not saying that.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of them. Some of them might be unlocking big potential. Some of them might not. And we don't want to be the arbiters of saying which ones do. Right? So it's up to the founder community to find them. But look for the things that are highly, highly specific in your market. Our markets are architecture, engineering, construction, and supply chains. If you're building a different B2B vertical, you can be looking for the exact same thing that could be highly specific. What we have noticed is that there is a ton of vertical singularities worth building around in construction, because it is so different from other B2B sectors, because it is a project-based industry. It's a service-based industry. It's a transactions-based industry. It's an industry that loves outcomes, not tooling as much. I mean, it does appreciate tooling, but in the end, you can't get anything done in construction without the outcomes. So all of these reasons create all these nuances and specifics about construction that are worth building around.
Yeah. Just to clarify, if someone, and by the way, I think I couldn't have phrased it better myself, and obviously you phrased it, so I couldn't have phrased it better myself, how you define vertical singularity. But just also to clarify for our viewers, some of you may be thinking, hey, a singularity, does this mean that a singularity needs to be something with like cutting edge tech, some sort of frontier technology, etc.? No, that's not at all what we mean here. It's basically, think of like a souped up version of a category creator. A very rare, almost an anomaly in the world of venture or in the world of AECS and for whatever reason, it's not getting the love from the investor side, as we've discussed, but has an incredible insight into what the market wants, what their customers or the users want, and the founders are able to feed off of it to create this vertical singularity.
I mean, one example from the portfolio, perhaps we give one example, but also because we've already made a bet here, I think, so when it came to energetic renovation of the building stock, most of the herd heuristics of the last 20 years was, let's build something around the energy consumption, basically measured in kilowatt hours per year, kWh per year or per day or whatever, right, per time unit. Because, that's something that is available. And well, the problem with availability of the consumption data of energy is everybody has it. The utilities have it, the grid operators have it, the meter operators have it, the real estate asset owner has it, everybody has it. And unfortunately, it doesn't have a lot of value of designing actually a merit order of useful energetic renovation measures. Then there was the fad of, okay, then let's get the load curves of the technical equipment, meaning the boilers or the heat pumps or the solar installation, etc. Again, that's not a particularly useful data point to have because A, it's locked in with the OEM. It's actually not particularly open to get that data. And B, it doesn't tell you also nothing about how to optimize the building. What was the one thing that was overlooked and that was completely specific to buildings was the physical building substance. So someone needed to go out and actually measure the thickness of the wall and how many panes the windows have and how old the windows are. What is the heat pump in there? What is the gas boiler in there? What year? How's the pitch of the roof? Nobody wanted to touch that 3 years ago until Enter came along, and Enter did exactly that. They went after this vertical singularity of going after this highly specific data in this specific category that nobody wanted to touch. They couldn't get a pre-seed round done. We did the pre-seed round against all herd heuristics, and now they're a massive rocket ship success. They grow like crazy. They have great margins. Amazing investors. They did 4 rounds in 2 years, just closed the Series B, which we haven't announced, massive round. It works. That's a vertical singular. And honestly, sorry, I couldn't even come up with an analogy to your earlier point. Like what is an attribute of like a singularity and a category creator? Well, it might be that you actually struggle to find a perfect analogy for it. The best analogy that I could come up with for Enter in our memos was a Carfax for buildings, but it's a limping analogy. It doesn't work particularly well, but Carfax at least captures a little bit of the physical history of a car. But Enter is just way more detailed around that singularity in buildings.
Yeah, kudos to you for spotting it, much along the lines of what we've been saying about singularities. You spotted that this is a diamond in the rough, and what an amazing company, what amazing timing, really leading into the market need.
To something that we said earlier, I could not have spotted this in another sector because I lacked the empathy or the details. I come from energy. I did first solar, then I worked for one of the world's largest utilities. I just understood this. And so that's what B2B capital allocation should be like. It should be done by people with expertise and empathy for the nuances of a sector.
Absolutely.
In the early stages.
And I guess that ties in very elegantly to this discussion point on earning nuanced knowledge.
So tell me about it. So Shub, tell me about it. What does earning nuanced knowledge mean to us?
Look, I think it could mean different things, and in practice, it perhaps is a potpourri of different ways in which this knowledge gets applied. I think, ironically, I would say it perhaps starts with unlearning a lot of things we have taken for granted, right? Before, either as investors or operators or past lives, and treating it as, hey, it's a blank slate. As I've been mentioning, we are in the dawn of the construction tech era. So the rules are not set. The rules are being created as we speak. So absorbing what's happening out there in terms of all the, the startups, the stakeholders, what's happening around the world, which we obviously at Foundamental are in a incredible position to actually soak in all that knowledge from all parts of the world in real time, and applying it in a very first principles way, not based on And I know we'll get to that eventually, not based on, hey, is this something which so and so will like, or is this something which has already gotten funded somewhere else, etc. Just looking at it and just treating it almost as though um, I was about to say something that would make sense to a 5-year-old. I think that's not true. That would trivialize it. But in the sense, at least where you can follow a trail based on all the sources of knowledge that you've allowed to come to you and soak in, and then make sense to you, unbiased from all the, I guess, bad and dark learnings we have from other sources of VCs and startups, etc.
I think that's bang on. I mean, this part of the letter we could literally not have written 5 years ago because we were still in that mindset and we had to unlearn this as well. And we had to unlearn it to learn something new, which is, what now defines us. And that's part of our journey as well, is like constant learning and getting better and, tweaking. To give you an example from yesterday, completely funny and blew my mind, but it kind of summarizes everything up until here that we've been discussing, including the nuanced knowledge piece that we're talking about now. So we have a portfolio company that is building a neobank for construction contractors, and they start the neobank with financing products, including invoice financing.
Okay.
And if you're from construction, you know that construction contractors generally have no access to financing. It's very hard to underwrite them because the sector follows different logics, project-based, etc. But that doesn't mean that they have bad credit score. It's just that nobody gives them good credit score. That's a difference.
Yeah.
So the company has been growing like crazy. This week collected multiple term sheets for crazy successful investors, etc. So one of these investors who put a term sheet called me and said, Patric, my partnership doesn't get this, but it doesn't matter. I'm championing this deal. I understand what they are doing. And I asked him, hey, like what are they not getting? And he said, honestly, the dumbest question I got from my partners was, okay, so this is subprime lending. And I burst out in laugh. I mean, I'm like, literally, that's what your partners ask you? Like, that's the best question they can come up with, is like, this is subprime lending? That is like, it couldn't be worse. It couldn't be more way off. But that is the reality, Shub. I can't even, I mean, I'm laughing about this, right? But in the end, you also can't blame these people. Again, coming back to the point of empathy. How do you know what question to ask if you don't know the nuances? You can't even come up with the question. If someone came to me and proposed an agriculture tech company, how would I know what question to ask? It's impossible for me, right? So I would need to wait until there's a lot of data in the company, numbers especially, to really start gaining some conviction in it without knowing the details and the nuanced knowledge. I couldn't even come up with a question. And that's the point here, is in early stage, the B2B allocation into our sector only works if you work your way up by spending time with founders, experts in the industry, working on all these details, because it unlocks asking the right questions in the first place.
Listening to what you said, I'm having a tough time actually holding back a laugh. And we've actually not shared these examples on any of the Practical Nerds episode. And I think we unfortunately can't share the details. But how many times has it happened, Patric, that, some company comes along and a generic investor will say, hey, how does this company compete against XYZ? Yeah. And that other XYZ company is like totally different.
Has nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do with it. So we even have cases where someone says, hey, I'm an investor in that other company, so I can invest. Like, hey, have you done even like 1 minute research? It has nothing to do with that other company at all.
And it is funny, but I mean, to be fair, you have to know what questions to ask. If you can't even formulate the question, it's hard. It's hard. Yeah. So we're speaking a lot of truth here and not holding back, which seems to be another of the 4 convictions that we form, perhaps speeding up a little bit. But so one of the things, Shub, that I think we realized, I think they were in the DNA of Foundamental, but we would not have written it this way 5 years ago. But now we do, because it's actually been our DNA from day one for all those years. I think we have just made great experiences with mature-minded founders who love our veracity, who love that, we're able to come to concise truths, tell them our viewpoint, our opinion, and tell them the way we see the world. Doesn't always mean that we're right. We try to be right more than we're wrong, or hopefully, as much as possible. But at the very least, you get a very clear-cut, truthful, no beating around the bush answer, and oftentimes it will be the correct one. Mature-minded founders love it. Immature-minded founders perhaps not. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think one thing we have learned, both in a good way and in a hard way, is, and I think we spoke about this in our episode on the founder traits we love. Founders love, the high quality founders we love, fully embrace the partnership mentality and the co-owner mentality, which also means you're not kind of putting on like an appearance and putting on a sales pitch all the time.
Yeah.
Right? You understand the implications of getting an investor on board for the next, say, 5-10 years or more, and all the good and bad that comes of it. And therefore, you're prepared to be completely uncomfortable. And I think those are the kinds of interactions where I have enjoyed the most, both pre and post investment, where many times founders will actually come out and say, hey, you know what, for these reasons, I'm a bit skeptical about what will happen, or maybe things may not go according to plan for so and so reason. Ironically, usually people making these statements, generally I found to be like the most accomplished, most mature, the ones with the strongest unfair advantage in what they do. Those are the ones who say this. So it's clearly not because of lack of competence that they're saying any of these things.
That makes sense to me. And I think the underlying reason why you should be speaking truth to each other. I always say that transparency plus truth equals trust. TR. The reason why you should actually foster that and want that is because you're in a decision-making business. You take 10 decisions every day. And so the metaphor that I like to use is that traditional business, not startup, is also decision-making business. And it's akin to like driving your car on the German Autobahn at like 100 miles per hour, right? So there's traffic left and right, and so circumstances change. There's curves in the road. There's, inclination, and then you need to decelerate, and you need to take a lot of decisions at a high speed. Startups is doing the same thing, but at 300 miles per hour.
Yeah.
So you actually want the very best information as early and as instantly as possible in order to come to good decision making. And that's what great founders and mature founders, oftentimes on their second, third, fourth tour, they actually have realized it increases in this business of high speed decision making their chances of not just being successful, but maximizing the success.
Absolutely. I think it ties in. I mean, I know that our next point is not completely to do with investors, but structurally it's the same mindset. It's the same mindset, right? Because I think so many times, and it's unfortunate, we are all like trained on this sort of VC bro culture, if you will, where you're all are chasing the next big kick or the next high from good news, which may help further either our career or further our prospects for something else, further our standing in our own little clique, etc., chasing either access to hot deals or next funding, etc. And we have sort of got so hooked to good news, we have lost the ability as a group or as a profession to recognize bad news. And the fact that bad news also plays an equal or perhaps even more important role in the ongoing journey. And therefore you need... Oh, please go on.
And I think we've talked a lot about like structural issues with regard to capital allocation. Here's another structural issue of the venture ecosystem hidden in what you're saying. So we're talking about the inability to handle discomfort, which... I want to talk about like the root cause, but quickly the symptom, just elaborating on the symptom you're describing. For the founder, the symptom will feel that my investors call me more often during 6 weeks of fundraising than they have called me in the previous 46 weeks of the year about, hey, how's your business going? Can I help you? What can I do? Early stage investors, like seed stage investors, they're better at this, but there's a lot of room for improvement. Later stage investors, oh my God, right? So they will call you during 6 weeks of fundraising more often than before. That's one symptom, and there's many other symptoms of what you're describing. The structural root cause of this is that as an industry, founding partners of venture firms are trying more and more, and I'm speaking mostly of generic venture firms here because vertical venture firms rarely reach the size to do what I'm about to describe. Generic venture firms, as they scale to a certain amount of capital commitments, the founding partners get lazy. I can't say it any other way. They then try to scale the unscalable by taking a backseat, becoming part-time, doing more yachting and sailboating than actually being in the business. And at the same time, they don't distribute the equity the same way. So what you're doing is you're delegating now the sourcing work, the diligence work, the portfolio management work, and the decision-making to an army of employees.
Yeah.
But that changes structurally how your business operates because you still own the equity. You still, in the end, want to have the last say of what gets done, but you don't put in the work of actually, talking to the founders, analyzing the market, right? Now, that unfortunately, in an outlier power law business, it does not work, right? So what that does is with these employed investors, what does it do? Well, everything in life, all the behavior you get from people is always driven by structures and incentives. So what you're creating is an army of employed investors in these super large firms where the founding partners take a backseat that thrive on news because they chase promotions. They don't chase great outcomes for the fund. They will tell you they do, but in the end, when you just look and observe, you will see people chasing great news to find reasons for getting promoted. Why? You can't even blame them. Well, because they don't share in the same equity pool the way that the founding partners who've taken a backseat do. That is structurally and fundamentally the reason why. And the best advice here I can give for founders, if you want to avoid these symptoms of your investors not being able to handle discomfort, not being useful to you, just avoid companies where that setup is structurally in place. Only go for founder-led venture firms. Everything else is going to put you into structural hot water.
Look, I couldn't have said it better myself. If I have to summarize what this leads to as a dynamic, what you have is within the VC firm, instead of the individuals being investors, what they become is salespeople and brokers.
Exactly.
The broker to kind of extract a decision, if I may say so, extract a decision from the GPs and or broke a deal where they think eventually it will quickly get a markup from someone else in their clique. And what it means is you're no longer talking to an investor, you're talking to a broker.
Yes.
Right? And that comes with all the, perhaps there's benefits, but it also comes with all the drawbacks of talking to a broker.
Yes.
Right? So it's no longer an investor you're associated with.
So structurally, how we believe about this differently is our investors, after they have proven themselves, so colleagues that are currently not GPs yet, after they have proven themselves during a probation, they actually share in our equity. Also, the portfolio management in Foundamental is not done by the junior investors. It's done by the most experienced investors, because that's another symptom of the structural issue that we just described. Because the founding GPs are getting lazy and fat and doing sailboating, they don't have time for portfolio work. I'm not kidding you, Shub. Here's an example. So one of the largest venture funds in Europe was founded by a unicorn founder. Mm-hmm. That unicorn founder is still the name brand. I mean, the venture fund doesn't carry his name, but like everybody associates it with him. So this fund had a term sheet out for one of our managed marketplaces in Europe, which is sort of a cross-border infra market for Europe. Successful business, 100 million annualized GMV, net profitable. The 100 million annualized GMV is sometime last year. I'm sure it's different now. Net profitable. Company had a term sheet out. The founder asked them, hey, but this founding GP, I want you on my board. You know what he said to him? He wanted to win this deal. He wanted to back this company. He said, sorry, I don't have time for it. I prefer doing more hobbies right now. I was like, are you kidding me? Like what is this? I'm not making this up. This literally happens. And that's the reality of many of these super large generic venture firms where the founding GPs take a backseat. So for us structurally, whenever one of us will take a backseat, judge us by what we're saying now, because we're already implementing the countermeasures. Our people already share more and more in the equity, but the portfolio management is done by the GPs. The work with the portfolio is done by the GPs, because that's what you deserve as a founder, and that's what counters this problem structurally.
Absolutely.
So overall, Shub, I think people are getting now an impression of like convictions that we believe in, and build on ourselves differently. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I just briefly want to call this out. A lot of the things that we love, in my market, in Europe, for me, the benchmark is 0.9. I think the way 0.9 from a philosophical point of view is building their company structurally. I agree with perhaps not everything, but almost everything. And it's an inspiration to how you can build a legendary investment company without repeating the mistakes. So to me, that's an inspiration.
I have to agree with you. I think everything that I've learned about 0.9 points to a very, very well-structured firm and a very repeatable firm.
Yeah, and another one in the US that I admire is Matrix Partners. I think also very, very strong intrinsics that we like to repeat, which we're coming to the end of the letter here. We've talked about singularities so much. I think we should just wrap it up. Like, Shub, singularities, we're looking for it, just summing it up, because they are the true nature of category creation potential in the B2B sector, and especially in our sectors, architecture, engineering, construction, and supply chains. And just tease me here. We've talked in a previous episode about our hidden in spite of obvious framework. We've also covered it on AEC-VC. It's so core to us, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think the devil is really in the details here. What we spoke about is looking for something which is hidden but obvious, right? And what do we mean by that? In the sense, it is hidden to generic VCs, people who are part of the herd in the startup or VC ecosystem, but it is serving an extremely obvious need for industry insiders, market participants who are happy to pay or be involved with the platform and really helping drive adoption. That is in my opinion, and I said my opinion, but I think we all are in agreement here, is clearly a key ingredient in a category creator or a vertical singularity.
I agree. And so the bottom right quadrant, if you're watching the video, is like where it's obvious to generic people and it's obvious to insiders. And as a founder, you might think, hey, that's great, because then I can do business and I can raise capital for it.
Yeah. Oh
my God. No, that is exactly how you build a category clone, right? So that is exactly how you got a quick commerce company number 12.
Exactly.
That does not make sense. You should be gunning for the top right, or if you take like casino-like risk, the top left, which is it's hidden to everyone, meaning you're taking a crazy market risk. You're betting on an assumption in the market to become true in a certain time frame, and then if you're right, you're gonna be the one that cashes out because you built for that. You can do that too, but you're dependent on a few uncontrollable factors. But like the top right is where you have earned nuanced knowledge. You're building against a vertical singularity, which is completely unobvious to generic people because it's so specific to the sector that they won't be able to come to a conviction in the early years. And you should embrace that. That's not Shub, you've written this part in our letter. That's not a bug. That's a feature of building a category creator in our business.
Yeah, in fact, for all those of you who feel like the oddballs with what you're building, I can only tell you that we hear you. I hope this comes across as a source of motivation and inspiration to you, that in all likelihood, at least you're in the right, let's say you're in the right half of the quadrant.
Yeah.
You just need to now at least get to also finding the obvious adopters to what you're doing, and then you're sorted.
Yeah, I agree. Which brings me to, just to bring everything home, to like one final conclusion about the herd heuristics and generic VCs allocating capital inefficiently into regularities. And that's the signals that you should use, right? So both as a founder as well as an early stage investor in our sectors, really what you want to be looking for is like the strong signals and not the poor signals. Strong signals being, in the end, all the ground up work. What do customers do? Not necessarily what do they say, what do they do? Suppliers, same thing. In the end, as an early stage investor, P&L and cash flows to me are way more important than any other numbers. And I place a lot of emphasis on like seeing A+ talent move into a certain direction. Why? Because capital is a commitment and there's skin in the game, but there is no more skin in the game than committing your lifetime to something. And so if a founder team, against all odds, looking oddbally, looking outside the norm, can attract 2 or 3 A+ talent people, honestly, that tells me there's something there, because these people, when they are truly A+, will have done a ton of diligence of investing their lifetime. So that for me is strong signals. But unfortunately, the norm of the VC industry is to use poor signals, and they don't even realize it. Yeah. They use fundraising amounts, they use press releases and drop names to kind of judge whether a category is worth pouring more money into the early years. That's like a very, very poor way of allocating time as well as money. So for us, as early stage investors, we like to believe that we focus on strong signals. I don't think we're completely immune to the poor signals. And it takes a very deliberate effort of a good investor, we like to think we are, to unthink of the poor signals. It's with all the echo chambers out there, it's really hard, but you have to do it.
Awesome.
So Shub, long-term destinations, want to leave us with some inspirational words about the next 5 years of Foundamental? We've talked a lot about like the learnings and how they shaped us. What's next?
Look, I think we've come this far as a firm with, I would say, a small fraction of the knowledge we have today and the self-awareness and the learnings we have today. I think compounding on ourselves, we are absolutely primed to go much further here, right? Just not only off the back of our knowledge, but I think the sector is taking off as well. And I couldn't be more excited about both, this prospects for construction tech, as well as obviously in a very selfish sense, our own prospects. And hey, I think if you are watching or listening to this episode, I think you may, someday sooner or later want to talk to us, and we'd love to build the next vertical singularity with you.
I can only add one or two things. So like you, I feel more excited now than I did 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, we bet our careers and lives and money, literally, on this. And I feel more excited now than I ever did. This is not made up. This is not marketing. This is not PR. This is not bullshit. This is me actually feeling that way. I don't think we have ever had such an exciting time, because everything that we talked about for the last hour, it's compounding. It's compounding. And because Foundamental has really, in my opinion, learned the things that you need to learn in order to be the best partner in the first years of a business. Now, what we do, would it translate into the growth stage of construction? It would, but so does generic investing, right? Mm-hmm. But in the early stage, I think the only partner you want is someone like us. And so that's our objective for the next 5 years. Build that legendary become that legendary vertical investment firm, because founders tell us we changed that trajectory and we've become the best partner that they've ever had. That's the ambition.
I can see it happening, and I'm incredibly excited for that.
Me too. All right, so vertical singularities.
Absolutely.
Sir, we're way over time, so let's skip the ritual of what's in the calendar next week, and we'll catch up on that in the next episode.
We'll do just that.
Okay, cheers.
See you.